Picture a Sunday open house in a hillside neighborhood where the driveways are longer than most people's living rooms. A valet waves cars onto the side lawn. Inside, the marble floors have just been polished, there's a tray of catered bites by the kitchen island, and a broker in a tailored blazer is greeting each new arrival by name. 40 people move through in 3 hours. Someone asks about the wine cellar's temperature controls. Someone photographs the walk-in closet, presumably for their own place. By the time the last guest leaves, the broker looks like they just watched 40 potential paydays walk through a single afternoon. You do the obvious math. Sell one house like this, and you probably clear more than most people make in a year. Multiply that by a dozen listings, and the job looks like a quiet path to serious money. Here's the problem. That open house is the 1 hour of the whole deal that lies to you most convincingly. It's a stage set, built for exactly 3 hours, designed to look like demand and momentum, and it tells you almost nothing about the 18 months of unpaid work behind it, or the 18 months that might pass before another commission clears. Luxury real estate brokerage isn't really a house-selling business. It's a relationship management business that happens to have marble countertops and a tennis court scattered through it. Once you see that, the way this profession makes money and the way it quietly bleeds money in the background starts to make a lot more sense. There isn't one version of a luxury broker. There are several different businesses wearing the same tailored suit. At one end is the solo specialist, a single agent who spent a decade building relationships in one pocket of a city, closing 8 to 15 deals a year personally with almost no staff. Above that sits the boutique brokerage, 5 to 20 agents specializing in properties above a certain price point, sharing an office address and a reputation built over years. Above that is the global luxury network affiliate, a locally owned office that pays to attach itself to a recognized brand, buying a referral pipeline that spans continents in exchange for a real slice of every commission. And then there's the mega team model, built around one recognizable name, who stopped personally showing houses years ago and now runs a small company of buyers agents and transaction managers, all funneling deals up through a single brand while the principal takes a cut of everything the team closes. Each is a different bet on the question every gym owner faces with memberships. Do you make your money from a few enormous transactions handled personally, or a large volume handled by other people under your name? You'd assume the expensive part of this business is getting licensed. It isn't. That's a few $100s in coursework and exam fees. The expensive part is being taken seriously by people who already have more money than they'll ever need. A new agent breaking into the luxury tier typically affiliates with a brokerage that takes a percentage split on every deal, often 20 to 50%, in exchange for the address, the brand, and the pipeline. Before a single showing, there's the cost of looking the part, professional photos, a personal website, a wardrobe that won't look out of place in a 9-figure estate. Then there are the club memberships and charity boards where wealthy clients actually spend their time, because almost nobody wealthy finds their broker by searching online. Add continuing education, association dues, and MLs access fees. And a first-year luxury agent can spend $10,000 to $30,000 just establishing a presence before closing a single deal. Then comes the part almost nobody budgets correctly: marketing a listing. A modest luxury property in the $2 to $4 million range still needs professional photography, drone footage, and a walkthrough video and staging, which runs $3,000 for a smaller property or $25,000 or more for a sprawling estate staged for several months. Magazine placements, digital promotion, and a private broker preview with catered food can push total spend past $10,000 before a single offer arrives. Go into true ultra-luxury territory, $10 million and up, and marketing budgets regularly climb past $50,000. International syndication, private jet flyover photography, invitation-only preview events flown in from other markets. Here's what nobody mentions up front. In most markets, the listing agent fronts this cost personally, betting the property sells before the listing agreement expires. If it doesn't, the money is gone. All you have to show for it is a slightly better photography portfolio. That's the same decision a gym owner faces with equipment. Absorb the marketing cost yourself as a bet on your own closing ability, or ask the seller to share it up front, more like a joint venture. Fronting it yourself keeps the seller happy, but it drains your reserves in exactly the months when nothing has closed. Asking the seller to contribute protects your cash, but it can cost you the listing to a competitor who offered to cover everything. Neither choice is wrong. Whichever one an agent picks, they've locked in a cash outlay due whether the house sells next month or next year. Location matters too, just not the way it does for a gym. There's no fixed radius that reliably produces clients. A wealthy buyer in one city might be shopping for a second home 2,000 miles away. What matters is what a broker might call their farm, the neighborhood, building, or social circle where their name is already trusted. Most of a luxury agent's real clients arrive through referral, from a past client or a professional advisor, not a stranger who found them online. Office space still costs real money. A prestige address in a major luxury market can run $50 to $150 a square foot a year, and an office in the wrong location will struggle no matter how talented its agents are. Here's the idea that actually explains the whole profession, and it's a version of the same coin flip from the gym floor. Imagine everyone in a broker's contact database falls into one of two futures. In one, a client calls constantly, wants 20 showings across 3 neighborhoods, negotiates hard on every point, and closes on a comfortable but unremarkable $2 million property. In the other, a past client from 3 years ago never calls at all, but twice a year, unprompted, mentions their broker's name to a friend who's quietly worth tens of millions. Eventually, that friend closes on a $15 million estate. Which relationship is worth more? The second one, by a lot. The demanding client eats up dozens of hours for a modest payout. The quiet, dormant one costs almost nothing to maintain, a holiday card, an occasional check-in, and produces value without any active labor at all. That's why luxury real estate leans so heavily on relationship capital instead of transaction volume. A broker's real asset isn't their license or their marketing budget. It's the size and quality of their dormant network, hundreds of past clients and acquaintances who aren't buying or selling anything right now, but represent a standing chance of future value at almost zero ongoing cost. A gym floor could never physically hold every paying member at once, and a broker could never personally serve every contact in their database if they all decided to transact simultaneously. The whole model depends on most of that network staying quiet, waiting, until the rare moment someone needs a broker and remembers exactly who to call. There's a seasonal rhythm here too, and it shapes the whole financial calendar. A larger share of luxury listings hit the market in spring, as sellers aim to close before summer and families try to settle before the school year starts. That surge produces a real cluster of closings by early summer, followed by a genuinely quiet stretch heading into winter. When wealthy buyers are traveling, or just not in a deciding mood, experienced brokers plan their year around this, banking spring closings to carry them through the leaner months instead of spending as if the pace were permanent. The ones who struggle, scale up their lifestyle and marketing, spend during the busy season, and have no cushion when the quiet months arrive right on schedule. There's a structural choice underneath all of this too, the one every gym owner faces between going independent or buying into a franchise. Affiliating with a global network gives an agent instant credibility, a referral pipeline across markets, and a brand wealthy buyers already recognize before they meet the agent. That's genuinely useful for someone breaking into an unfamiliar market. But these networks typically claw back 5 to 10% of gross revenue, plus contributions towards shared marketing systems. An independent boutique keeps every dollar it earns, but builds its own credibility and referral network from nothing, one relationship at a time. None of the psychology built into a luxury listing is accidental. Sellers almost always want to price their home higher than the market supports, because the number is tied to their own sense of the home's worth, not what a stranger would actually pay. Part of an agent's real skill is managing that attachment without damaging the relationship, since a seller who feels pressured into a lower price can walk away entirely, even at real cost to themselves. Staging works on a similar principle. Neutral wall colors and pared-down furniture aren't chosen for beauty. They help a stranger imagine their own life in the space instead of someone else's. Personal photographs come down. Closets get emptied by half so they photograph as spacious. The smell of fresh paint or something baking during a showing is an old trick meant to create a subconscious sense of warmth before anyone says a word. Lighting gets the same treatment as it does on a gym floor, warm and soft in bedrooms. Brighter and more direct in kitchens and bathrooms to emphasize cleanliness. Even mirror placement matters, angled to bounce light deeper into a room, though too many mirrors in a small space makes it feel cramped instead. Every one of these choices exists for one purpose: to shorten the emotional distance between a stranger and a decision worth millions of dollars. And just as a gym makes leaving harder than joining, a listing agreement has its own friction built in. Exclusive listing agreements typically lock a seller in for 90 to 180 days, no walking away and hiring another agent without formal notice. Many also include a protection clause. If a buyer the agent personally introduced ends up buying the property within a set window after the agreement expires, even through a different agent, the original agent still gets paid. There's a legitimate reason for this. It protects an agent's work from being cut out of a deal they spent months building. But it also means the relationship doesn't just end when a seller decides to move on. This kind of friction has drawn real regulatory attention lately. A major industry settlement reshaped how commissions get disclosed and negotiated between buyers and their agents, forcing transparency into a system that had run for decades on assumptions buyers rarely questioned. It's not unlike the scrutiny subscription cancellation practices have gotten in other industries. There's a hidden cost trap in this business that has nothing to do with marketing, and it involves the photographs themselves. When a brokerage hires a photographer to shoot a listing, that photographer generally keeps ownership of the images under standard copyright rules, unless the contract specifically licenses those rights to the agent. Agents who assume a paid shoot means they can reuse those images on future listings for years, without checking what they actually licensed, can end up facing a legitimate claim for unauthorized use. A properly scoped licensing agreement costs almost nothing up front. A dispute after the fact, legal fees, and a negotiated settlement can run into thousands of dollars for something that should never have been an issue. It's a small example, but it points at the real lesson here. Almost none of the real costs lie where you'd expect. They're buried in a listing agreement clause, a photography contract, or a split sheet nobody reads carefully until something goes wrong. Overhead compounds quietly too. A boutique team running an office, support staff, and access fees for databases that track high net worth activity can face fixed monthly costs of $25,000 to $40,000 before a single commission check arrives. Liability exposure is real, since a paperwork error on a multi-million-dollar transaction can trigger a genuine dispute, which is why most established brokerages require agents to pay into a shared risk fund that spreads the cost of any single claim across the group. None of this looks dramatic, sitting alone on a spreadsheet. Stacked together month after month, it quietly decides whether a strong year on paper turns into real personal income. Can a business built this way fail even at enormous scale? Yes, and it happened in plain view. Compass grew explosively over less than a decade by raising enormous sums of venture capital and using it to recruit established agents away from competing firms, dangling signing packages and equity far richer than the agent's existing deals. On paper, the strategy looked unstoppable. Capture the most productive agents everywhere, and volume follows automatically. But recruiting that aggressively is expensive, and the commission splits needed to keep agents loyal left almost no margin behind. For years, the company posted enormous revenue alongside enormous losses, spending more to acquire market share than it recovered from the deals those agents actually closed. When the housing market slowed, it had to sharply cut recruiting incentives and restructure just to stay viable. I don't think anyone stopped wanting to buy or sell luxury property during that stretch. The business discovered that buying market share with rich recruiting packages, funded by investors expecting returns eventually, doesn't survive if the commission math on each individual deal never catches up to the cost of acquiring the agent who closed it. So how does this actually work in plain mechanical terms once you strip away the open houses and the catered food? Closed commissions minus brokerage splits minus fixed overhead. If a boutique team has fixed monthly costs of $30,000 and the average net commission per closed deal, after splitting with the brokerage and the agent on the other side, comes to roughly 25,000, that team needs to close a little more than one deal a month just to break even. Above that number, each closing is close to pure profit. Below it, the team is quietly losing money every month, no matter how many open houses filled with interested visitors happened along the way. The volatility follows right behind that math. Luxury transactions move slowly. The gap between meeting a serious buyer and closing on the right property can stretch 6 to 18 months. Longer for the pickier clients evaluating a handful of specific estates. A new agent rarely closes their first deal in month 1, which means the savings runway they build before going independent has to survive well over a year before real income arrives on any predictable schedule. Too thin a runway, or a competing team poaching a key referral source at the wrong moment. And the agent runs out of reserves before the pipeline produces its first real payday. Client relationships fade quietly too, in a way that mirrors membership churn almost exactly. Without deliberate follow-up, a meaningful share of past clients lose touch with their agent within a couple of years, drifting toward whoever stays visible in their life when they eventually need one again. The strongest agents treat their contact database the way a gym treats its membership base, something that needs constant renewal, not a one-time win. Lose touch with old relationships without replacing them, and you get the same effect as high membership churn, a business that looks busy but is quietly running in place. There's a second engine that breaks the hardest ceiling in this profession, and it echoes the shift from one-on-one personal training toward group coaching. A single agent working alone, however skilled, can only handle so many transactions a year. Every deal eats dozens of hours of showings and paperwork, and there are only so many hours available. That ceiling doesn't move no matter how hard you hustle. The way around it is building a team, hiring buyer's agents who absorb the day-to-day volume while the principal takes a percentage override on everything the team closes. One agent alone might close 15 deals a year, at most. A well-run team of 6 agents under one principal can close 60 or more. The principal earning a smaller slice of each deal, but a share of a much bigger total. Put it together, and 2 very different versions of the same year show up. In the optimistic one, the market holds steady. The referral pipeline keeps producing inbound interest. Marketing spend gets recovered through a healthy sale price, and the team closes 15 to 25 transactions across the year, averaging $3 to $5 million per property. Under those conditions, a well-run boutique team can generate well over $1 million in gross commission income, with the principal taking home somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 after paying the team, the overhead, and the brokerage split. A genuinely good year. In the realistic one, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong, none of them dramatic on their own. The market slows, and wealthy buyers, holding plenty of cash but feeling less urgency, take longer to decide, stretching average deal timelines from 8 months to 14. A competing team backed by a well-funded global network starts courting the same referral sources this team has relied on for years and pulls away 1 or 2 key relationships. Marketing costs on a handful of listings never get recovered because those properties sit unsold past their listing term and get relisted, sometimes with a different agent entirely. That same team can slide from 20 closings down to 10 or 11. Watch marketing spend rise as competition intensifies and see the principal's actual take-home drop by more than half. Even while the office still looks busy and the open houses still draw a respectable crowd every weekend. The gap between those 2 outcomes, same team, same market, can be several $100,000 in a single year. And almost none of that swing shows up as one visible event. No collapse, no headline, just a few referrals that quietly went elsewhere. A few deals that took longer than planned, and a marketing budget that stopped paying for itself the way it used to. So if the image of a crowded open house and a driveway full of expensive cars is what draws you toward this job, pay attention to what that scene actually tells you and what it doesn't. It doesn't tell you whether the broker running it has a real pipeline behind them or an empty one. It doesn't tell you whether the marketing money spent to fill that house will ever come back. What actually determines whether someone survives in this business was never really about how many people walk through a single open house on a Sunday afternoon. It's about how well their quiet, dormant network of past relationships carries them through the many months when no house is selling at all.